still towered above the lip of the abyss. As if untouched, the other half had vanished completely. Perhaps you can imagine my shock, my incredulity, as I stood on the street outside. This once impressive edifice, only moments earlier looking forward to, closeting myself with your manuscript. Naturally, I was appalled. Hastening to my office, no mean feat with the elevator still out of service and the stairwell littered with debris and twisted cock-a-hope, I chanced upon Trevor Marchman, a colleague in the literature division, who advised me against proceeding. His face was streaked with dirt and his tie askew. Placing a trembling hand on my shoulder, he explained we had lost the entire children's literature section, most of our genre fiction, romance being the sole exception, and our latest self-help guides. On the plus side, we had retained our highly successful cookbook and true crime lines. The nature and acts of God divisions, he continued breathlessly, had fortunately suffered only minor damage and were rushing to get first-hand accounts of the disaster published as soon as possible. Though he had not been to the literature office yet, he feared the worst as it straddled the line along which the building had been bisected. I shrugged off his hand and pushed forward, seized by a renewed sense of urgency. If the worst had happened, then I knew I must see it for myself. When I emerged on the 17th floor, there was little evidence of the catastrophe itself. The reception area looked much as it had for the last 2 decades, the patterned carpet-worn and dusty, the solid oak desk still manned by the ageless Philip, the chrome and vinyl chairs of the reception area occupied by the usual gallimaufry of writers, albeit more nervous and bedraggled than usual, clutching their usual assortment of boxed manuscripts and large manila envelopes. "Good morning, Mr. Gardner," Philip said with his customary aplomb, and several heads bobbed up, eyes looking hopefully in my direction. I nodded curtly at him, still too breathless from my exacting Robert Boyksuk. 9. Climbed to essay a more congenial response. Then I spun on my heel and hastened down the corridor. I passed the offices of proofreaders and junior editors, their names neatly stenciled on the frosted glass of the windows. Several doors were ajar, and within I could see young men and women seated amongst tottering piles of paper, diligently poring over galleys and manuscripts, the soft glow of computer terminals warming their backs. The air of normalcy gave me hope. I moved towards the corridor in which my office was situated. A few more steps, I thought, and I'll know the tale. My heart thudded fearfully in my chest. My door was where I had left it. I cannot convey to you in mere words the relief I felt. I thought briefly of Marchman, whom I had passed on the stairs, how I had always considered him foolish and fanciful, and how I'd forgotten this in my moment of panic. He was an alarmist, I now recalled, frequently berating literature. "There's no future in it," he had said more than once. "Get out while the getting's good." I chastised myself and vowed in future never to pay him the least attention at all. Stepping up to the door, I grasped the handle and pulled it open. A gasp escaped me. Opposite the door, where a paneled wall hung with framed photographs normally would have stood, was an expanse of blue sky. It was as if the wall had been swept cleanly away, leaving the rest of the room intact. I took a step forward. Outside, gulls circled against a backdrop of brilliant cerulean streaked by ropes of black smoke from the various fires that still burned unchecked about the city. The low, keening ululations of sirens sounded distantly. Looking down, I could see the dark rents where the earth had split open into gaping maws, all roughly parallel, like furrows made by a monstrous plow. Occasionally, the top of buildings poked above the lip of these crevices, as if they had been lowered there gently, on purpose. More often, the ruins of others were visible, some reduced to anonymous piles of rubble. In the deeper fissures, nothing but an ominous, impenetrable black was visible. Everywhere, tiny human figures were busying horror story and other horror stories themselves about the edge of the crevices, lowering ropes and ladders and cables, swarming into the ruins to rescue those that might still be alive, or perhaps to recover what they could of their lives. While I gawked at the carnage below, a sudden gust of wind blew through the office, riffling the pages of the topmost manuscripts that were still arrayed on the submission shelf. Loose sheets, hidden until now behind my desk, blew about the room in frenetic circles, too, fetching up against my legs and fluttering there like wounded birds. Then one was torn free and scud past the splintered edge of the wooden floor. It was snatched by an updraft and spun out of sight. I know of no way to soften the blow, so I'll give it to you straight. The pages were, as you may have guessed, pink. I glanced at my desk. other than a blotter and a modest pen and pencil set, a gift. Marking my 20th year of service, the desktop was empty, your manuscript gone, scattered by the wind. Bending over, I carefully peeled off the sheet still coiled about my shin. It was page 47. I moved as close as I dared to the edge of the room and caught sight of that other page, still dancing like a leaf in the wind, but drifting lower and lower now, falling inexorably towards the fissure. Eventually, I lost sight of it as it sunk into the dark reaches of the abyss. I stood there for a time staring after the lost page. Mr. Points, let me not bore you with the rest of the mundane details. Suffice it to say we recovered only 2 more pages from your manuscript, page 14 behind a radiator and page 312 caught up against a leg of my desk. The rest have vanished. Perhaps you may think it unfair to judge a manuscript on 3 disjoined pages, orphans as they were from their extended family. Yet, we often give a manuscript only a few pages in which to catch our attention. After that it is returned, the greater bulk of it unread, with a rejection slip. So I presume to judge your work, prepared to return the 3 remaining pages with this letter of apology and a somewhat gentler than usual rejection. However, this was not to be the case. At the risk of swelling your head, I saw in those brief, disconnected Ude, Cameron, Blaylock, Folsom, and Hui publications. September 21st, 19. Dear Mr. Points, this morning I stood for the first time at the edge of the abyss. The fissure is a long tear in the earth, 7 kilometers in length. The chasm measures 150 meters at its widest. Where I stand now, it is roughly 100 meters from lip to lip. Along its brink are office towers and commercial establishments, forming an eerie canyon of half-human, half-natural design. Those buildings that haven't collapsed entirely, leaving sad, gap-toothed openings in the wall, are similar to our own. It is as if the structures had been neatly sliced with a scalpel of extraordinary proportions, laying bare there innards like those cutaway models of car engines and hydroelectric plants one often finds in museums. In several, the day-to-day activity of commerce has resumed, and the figures of men and women could be seen working at desks or edging along the narrow lip of half corridors with a briefcase or file folder tucked beneath their arms. Occasionally, the trilling of a phone or the hum of a fax machine echoes from above. Nearest us, the crevice is steep, a sheer face that drops precipitously out of sight. Further along, a series of ledges of varying widths can be seen in the depths, some supporting the remnants of buildings, others littered with unidentifiable rubble. At our feet, however, nothing is visible save a blackness as thick and impenetrable as that of a child's nightmare. It is nearly noon now, and I am typing this note into my laptop as we are making last-minute preparations for the descent. The party I've assembled includes 2 mountaineering enthusiasts among the volunteers, only too eager to have a go at the face of the fissure. As I write this, they have already set off, and I can hear the ring of their hammers as they fix pitons in preparation for the descent of the main party. In total, we number 7. We might have had a nice round 10, but only moments ago, Marchman, whom I mentioned in my previous letter, sent word that he was recalling 2 editors and a proofreader, citing the loss of 2 other assistants who were unfortunate enough to be working late the night of the quakes and the rapidly approaching fall launch deadlines. Though I am in fact his senior, he being the assistant managing editor, literature, this seniority has always been nominal, eroding over the years until its only manifestation is an office with a window. Beyond that, we work as equals. Reluctantly, I must allow them to return. Yet, I continue to be optimistic. I believe the remaining members to be sufficient for the job. But let me not dwell on the bad. There is good news also. Searching near the lip of the abyss, we have already recovered half a dozen more pages of your manuscript, 73, 74, 121, 160, 344, and 349. I admit I was somewhat apprehensive when I read page 164. The prose there is unlike that of any of the other 9 pages. If I may be blunt, it stumbles along in an awkward, uncertain manner, poking about like a blind man with a cane in an unfamiliar room, leaving the reader to surmise from these faltering sentences its significance. This sudden change so unnerved me that for a moment I reconsidered the entire project. But then, pacing back and forth near the edge of the fissure, chin cupped in palm, I was struck by a thought. What if the words were purposefully awkward? What if this halting, muddled prose is intentional, reflecting the distracted state of a character's mind? Recalling the passage, I imagined a withered old man, soured by repeated disappointments in career and love, his outlook jaundiced by the accumulated bile of years of disillusionment. As if someone had adjusted a projector lens, he snapped into focus for me. Taken as such, his rendering was masterful. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this could be the only explanation. Trust, Mr. Points. I should have trusted my author. It is the first and foremost lesson of being a competent reader, and one I'd somehow forgotten. Thank you for reminding me. In future, I promise to give the pages of your manuscript the latitude they deserve. Yours apologetically, Roland Gardner, Managing Editor, Literature. Cameron, Blaylock, Folsom and Hui Publications. September 21st, 19. Dear Mr. Points, 6 of us began the descent in earnest this afternoon. The 7th, a pallid data entry clerk fearful of heights, remained at our base camp on the edge of the fissure. Earlier, we had attached a pulley to the top of an A-frame constructed of 2x4s. Running a lengthy rope over the wheel of the pulley, we tied a bucket to its end. We wound the other end of the rope around a windlass. Then we fixed the whole contrivance with cement blocks so that it projected out over the fissure. The clerk who remained behind will man this contraption, passing down such supplies as we need and pulling to the surface any pages we recover. He will work as if he were at A. Well, although he will be drawing words instead of water. Through this crude device and the clerk's diligence, I also hope to send you letters such as this one to keep you apprised of our progress. The first hours of climbing were uneventful. We rappelled down a featureless surface, the lights of our helmets crossing and crisscrossing in the chasm as we worked the ropes. The granite wall was smooth and surprisingly warm to the touch, as if it still retained traces of the heat produced during the upheaval. Looking to my right, I could just make out where the 2 walls came together in a sharp V.A. kilometer or so away, closing off the fissure. In the other direction, the end of the chasm was invisible, the light of my helmet fading into the darkness. As we descended, the sounds of our progress bounced off the opposite wall and were returned through some trick of acoustics. Magnified, at times I heard only the echo and not the sound that had engendered it, creating the illusion that there was another party, like ours, on the other side, also working its way towards the bottom. It was an unnerving sensation, and one I suspect affected the others as it did me. Conversation, brisk in the earlier stages, ceased altogether, as if no one wished to make any more noise than was absolutely necessary. Several hours passed in this manner. Bit by bit, awareness of my immediate surroundings slipped away, for there was nothing to fix my attention on save the endless wall in the darkness. What I thought of instead was my office and the manuscript still patiently waiting for me there. Of how, in all the years I'd been managing editor, literature, the pile has never once diminished. Read 1 and 2 more would appear. Read those and the afternoon mail would bring half a dozen additional submissions. Everyone in the world, apparently, has decided to become a writer. Now this might seem a cause for celebration, heralding a new golden age of literature. But, curiously, as our submissions increased, so our sales in the division have plummeted. Given this, I began to suspect that several of our regular correspondents wrote more novels in a year than they actually read. Being a writer yourself, Mr. Points, you may not find this strange. But for me, first and foremost a reader, this notion was disturbing. In the extreme, it was a love of reading itself that impelled me to become an editor. I had no writing aspirations of my own, nor do I. Now, I was, and am, a bibliophile in the truest sense of the word. I read gently, lovingly, losing myself readily in those landscapes of the imagination. When I was younger, I thought there was nothing more exciting than the smell of a new book. Ah, how I remember those days. I'd sit in my favorite wingback chair, my reading lamp on hand, ready, the unopened book in my lap, anticipating that moment, that glorious, orgasmic moment when the spine of the book would at last be cracked and the doors to an undiscovered world flung wide. Alas, there are few true readers left. And, sadly, altogether too many writers. What will happen when the scales have finally tipped? Will writers be forced to pay their readers for the privilege of having their novels read? Will I and other readers like me be courted by authors anxious to be read by someone who understands their work? I fear things may come to such a pass. Even in my division, the Bastion, or so one would like to believe. Of reading, we no longer attract readers of quality. Take, for example, young Trevor Marchman. To him, reading is merely a job, no better. Or worse than selling vacuum cleaners or making car parts on an assembly line. It is a convenient rung on the corporate ladder. I know. He eyes my position jealously, seeing it as a stepping stone to the rarefied heights of upper management. Though he does a competent job, it is performed passionlessly and without commitment. To him, the only thing that counts is the bottom line, of which he tirelessly reminds us. But I digress. I have left you and me hanging. Our progress down the wall of the fissure, as I have already said, was uneventful, at least until the end of the day, at which time we encountered an obstacle that caused us to halt our descent. For there we came across a series of small, regularly spaced ledges, jutting out from the wall. Swinging wide on the end of the line, a flashlight clutched in her hand, our lead climber reported that the ledges continued to mar the face of the fissure for some distance down, and estimated their number to be in the hundreds, if not the thousands, all ranging from half a meter to 2 meters in width. The bottom, she reported glumly, was still out of sight. One would think that we'd be grateful for any horizontal surface after countless hours of rappelling down sheer wall. Yet, when we finally decided to make camp, our party splitting into 3 separate groups to fit comfortably into the limited space of adjacent outcroppings. The momentary pleasure of shrugging out of the constricting loops of my climbing harness gave way to a feeling of dismay. These cursed ledges would, I realized, only make our job doubly difficult. Not only would they impede a speedy descent by taking away our direct line to the bottom, but we would also be forced to investigate each and every outcropping lest we miss a single page of your manuscript. Such an undertaking will require days. But what else can we do? I have spent a lifetime chasing words and know no other way. Yours sincerely, Roland Gardner, Managing Editor, Literature. Cameron, Blaylock, Folsom and Hui Publications. September 24th, 19. Dear Mr. Points, it took the better part of 2 days, but we've completed our inspection of the ledges. We sit here on one of the last sizable outcroppings, as we patiently await our daily rendezvous with the bucket. Below, the wall drops away, black and featureless, into the depths. Our efforts, though taxing in the extreme, have yielded 12 new pages, more than I could have reasonably hoped. I read them all with great interest, saving for the last 3 consecutive pages, 212 to 215, stuck together along their edges by a dark, gummy substance, cappuccino. If I were to hazard a guess, etva, I must say Nell is a completely and unexpectedly delightful creature. Her name, like her idiosyncratic way of speaking, is at first distracting, but within the space of a few hundred words becomes wholly natural and familiar, leaving us feeling sheepish for not having realized sooner, as you clearly did, how truly suitable it is to use such a name and make it work as well as you have is not an inconsiderable feat. It reveals the hand of a master. Though I am a jaded reader, I was absorbed by your description of her and found myself watching Nell with fascination. With a start, I realized that in the brief span of 3 pages, I had come to care a great deal about her. You may understand, then, why I was disturbed by the scene on page 331, where a child, who might or might not be Nell, dies. Could it be her? No, don't answer. I must find out for myself. Your besotted reader, Roland Gardner. P.S. A curious event to report. Yesterday, without warning, a building dropped past, narrowly missing us, the screams of its occupants, clearly audible above the building's own complaints. Perhaps it had clung to the edge for as long as was possible, then gave up hope and tumbled into the abyss. The experience left me somewhat shaken, not only because of what might have happened if the building had chosen to tumble upon our party, but also because I had thought it to be our building. But at the last moment I caught sight of a flash of red, the telltale banner of the neighboring insurance firm. Why, one wonders, do people, and I count myself among their number, continue to inhabit edifices on the brink? Is it force of habit? An irresistible love of their work? A way of confronting their fear? Or do they just have nowhere better to be? If it is the last, I sometimes wonder why they do not leap themselves and have done with it. But then, that kind of courage is a rare quality amongst men and women. A business. September 25th, 19. Dear Mr. Points, today we reached the beginning of the end. That is to say, we encountered a series of flat shelves that descend, like a gargantuan staircase, to the floor of the chasm. We decided to strike a base camp here from which we will explore the steps more fully. After assembling our tents, the blue fabric, incongruously bright against the black and dark gray in which everything else down here is expressed, we gathered stones to ring a fire. The overall effect is, surprisingly, cheery. As I write this, my back is to the camp and I am sitting on the edge of the first step, my legs dangling 2 meters above the next. Here and there the debris of buildings can be seen, not 5 meters from my perch, and 2 steps down is a crumpled hot dog cart, its decaying contents spilled over the hard, unforgiving ground. Scattered throughout the carnage are pink sheets. It was all I could do to keep myself from clambering down a rope to the next level so as to collect more pages. But we are exhausted from the day's work, and we have already gathered 23 pages from the first step. I still have not learned any more about Nell, though the pages we recovered span a broad range: 7, 23, 29, 68, 101, 128, 145, 155, 170, 221, 224, 226, 256, 289, 303, 314, 367, 368, 390, 395, 400, 416, 421. There is nary a mention of her. Could she have only been an ancillary character? A convenient figure who carries out her role and then is casually discarded? Somehow, I cannot bring myself to believe this. The writing is, as usual, impeccable, the voice authoritative, and refreshingly new. Peach is a fine foil for the Colonel, and his antics make for what I assume will evolve into an interesting subplot. The arcane practices of the sisters, introduced on page 68, hint at a sense of foreboding that is skillfully rendered. And when the Harrisons came over and disported themselves on the lawn, well, I laughed aloud. A few of the finer points bothered me, however. When did the Colonel acquire his scar? Have both the sisters seen it? Yet, as entertaining as these others are, they are still mere shades next to Nell. I cannot get her out of my head. You may think it foolish, but I've offered the lion's share of the rations to whoever finds the next reference to her. I'd best go now. All the others have turned in and we make an early start of it tomorrow. I can hear the assorted sounds of their sleep, wheezing and snorts and restless shufflings from directly behind me. The only other sound one hears down here is the occasional stone clattering down the side of the fissure or the wind howling far above, like it is blowing through a troubled place we've left behind. Down here, though, nothing stirs. Everything is calm. All the countless distractions of the waking world have disappeared without a trace. In a way, I am growing to like this. Still yours, Gardner. P.S. When the bucket descended at its appointed time yesterday, it contained, along with the usual rations of sardines and bread, a brief, handwritten note from a junior editor on my staff. In it, he worries that our expedition might be recalled. There are rumors, you see, that Marchman has acquired the ear of the chief managing editor in my absence. It is widely known Trevor has opposed our purpose from the start. A reliable source reports that during a discussion of your manuscript he was heard to mutter, "There are plenty more where that came from." I'm afraid he can be a rather insensitive bastard at times, but I should be more gracious. If only he had read, as I have, these scant pages, he might not be so pig-headed. But one of the great tragedies of life is that you cannot force people to read what they ought, as good as it might be for them. September 26, 19. Dear Albert, a major find. I can barely contain myself. After we returned to our base camp on the first step, I collated the pages we had collected today, 53, in total from the first 7 steps. My hands trembled uncontrollably when I realized we had recovered the longest continuous section thus far, pages 231 through 254. Perhaps this will satisfy them upstairs. Although I am certain Marchman will be unimpressed, I believe the chief managing editor to be a perspicacious man. He will understand the importance of this find. Yet in my elation and disappointment, nothing about Nell, unless the first sentence on page 231, in its elided phrase, knew he couldn't get her out of his mind, nor out of his house, refers to her. Yet I fear not. As for the rest of it, the writing is top drawer. Though I don't quite see how these pages relate to the rest of the novel, they are brilliantly conceived. Until this moment, I had supposed this was a coming-of-age tale, but this new section calls my assumptions, presumptuousness, into question. One moment I was happily immersed in your story, the next I realized I'd misread large parts of it. But then, isn't that what the best writing does? Throws you a curve when you least expect it. I shall have to rethink my approach to your work. It will be difficult now that the bulk of the manuscript has been sent up top. But, as I often said, patience and doggedness are the hallmarks of a good reader. Roulanger. P.S. I apologize for the brevity of this note, but the bucket fell early, today surprising us and nearly breaching my skull. No sooner had we placed the pages of your manuscript within it than it was jerked back up, as if that junior editor working the line is growing impatient. With his rack, calmly, I regained my feet and walked, somewhat unsteadily, towards the small protection it offered, catching my right thigh on a jagged edge and tearing both my khakis and the skin beneath as I angled my body into the opening. Absurdly, I had wedged myself facing in. Behind me, the havoc continued unabated. I cannot say how long the entire episode lasted. To me it seemed to be upwards of half an hour. In reality, it could only have been a few minutes. When it did finally end, I backed out from my refuge to find the landscape altered beyond recognition. A thick cloud of dust hung in the air, shattered stone was everywhere, the shelves of rock leading downwards, once smooth and regular as stairs, had buckled and splintered. Our camp and all its equipment had disappeared, save for the single tongue of blue tint fabric that flared out from beneath one of the larger boulders. Overhead, barely visible through the narrow channel that leads back to that other world, dark clouds roiled, but whether they were thunderheads or an accumulation of the blackest smoke I could not have said. The long and short of it is that our party has been decimated. Our lead climber lies unconscious, a fragment the size of a finger embedded in her forehead. 2 others have disappeared, either buried in the new debris or panicked and run off. The remaining members, a lad who clutches his knees and rocks back and forth while emitting a low moan, and a woman who stares sullenly into the darkness, refusing to answer any questions, are covered in bruises and numerous cuts. Our situation is not good. Our supplies are gone. We have no tents, no food, and only 2 functioning lamps. Nor will there be any chance of replacing them. Earlier, searching through the rubble, I came across the corpse of that hapless editor who I had stationed on the edge of the abyss. He lay jammed between 2 boulders, his thin body folded over like a sheet, his vital fluids collecting in a sticky puddle beneath. Curiously, a crumpled piece of paper lay caged within his lifeless finger. Swallowing back my distaste, I managed to pry the note free. It was from the chief managing editor and addressed to me. In no uncertain terms, we'd been recalled. I wadded the note up and buried it deeply in the debris. How things can change in the space of a few moments. I had thought us safe from that other world, too distant to be touched by its vagaries and inexplicable whims. But, Mr. Points, when the very ground heaves beneath you, what certainties are left? The others wish to return to the surface. I tried to explain how. I need their help more than ever now that several pages of your manuscript may lie buried in the debris. How this is what the chief managing editor would wish. But my pleas fall on deaf ears. Nor would they hear anything of Nell. Ignoring me, they have begun rigging a litter in which they hope to raise their wounded comrade. Leaving now would serve no purpose. Can they not see she is already as good as dead? But explaining this to them has no effect and only seems to infuriate the sullen lad. He has taken to throwing stones at me when I approach. Tonight, while they sleep, I will slip this letter into the pocket of the lead climber. I do not know how or when I will be able to apprise you of my further progress. I do, however, believe the chief managing editor will come to his senses and renew the search. But that may not be for some time. For now, I carry on alone. Please forgive me for scribbling this note on the back of your manuscript, but it is the only paper I have. 2, or is it 3, days have passed since my last letter. I cannot be certain of the time, for my watch is gone, its strap severed. In my mad scramble down the broken shelves of rock, nor can I say if it is day or night. At this depth the opening to the upper world is no longer discernible. For all I know, the fissure might have resealed itself, leaving me forever trapped Yesterday, I reached bottom. A cold, steady breeze winds like a river along the bed of this lowest level, trapped in a narrow channel. Between the steps I descended and another set climbing the opposite wall. Lowering myself from the penultimate shelf to the floor was like slipping into icy water. In the last days I'd recovered only half a dozen new pages. Now, on the lowest level, I found but 2 more caught against rocks. The bulk of the missing pages, I surmised, had been carried off by this gelid breeze. Perhaps you can understand the momentary dismay I felt. I had thought my journey near its completion, only to discover yet another ending in store for me. Now don't misread me. The pages I found I'd consumed with the same eagerness a starving man might consume a single celery stick. I was grateful, but it was only enough to sharpen the edge of my hunger. So I set off, the wind at my back, the weakening beam of my flashlight marking my way, determined to go the distance. I walked slowly, doubled over, searching carefully for any stray sheets. The wind increased, its icy fingers snapping the cuffs of my pants with loud cracks and causing me to shiver uncontrollably. I ignored it as best I could, hunkering down into a small shape, continuing to sweep the light back and forth across the floor. So great was my concentration that it wasn't until some time later, when I paused to stretch, that I realized the walls of the fissure had drawn, and in the channel had shrunk to half its original width. Pointing the light ahead, I discovered I was no more than 50 meters from the point at which the 2 walls met. At the base of the conjunction was what appeared to be an incline of scree like one often sees at the foot of a retreating glacier, though it was hard to be certain, the weakening cell of my flashlight now incapable of clearly illuminating anything that distant. I hurried ahead, pushed along by the mounting wind. When I reached the base of the scree, I stopped, clinging to a large rock to be kept from being blown over. The wind tore past me, howling up along the incline of rubble and rushing into a black, man-sized opening at its summit. It looked as if the gap had, at one time, stretched from the floor of the fissure to its present height. But the last upheaval must have sent this rubble down to partially block the opening, constricting the passage through which the wind drew their conversation. But an odd color in the field had hooked his attention. A blotch of pink in the midst of seargrass and thick-limbed evergreens. It moved, stood up, or seemed to, although it was hard to tell with the motion of the car, the rapid change in perspective. An animal? But there were no animals that color. None. That Damien knew about, anyway. He craned his neck. Only the angle was gone, the field lost to sight. Are you listening to me? Of course I am. I can't wait any longer, Damien. If you won't do this for me, then... Paul's voice trailed off. Then what? Then I'm moving out. Damien felt like he'd been sucker punched. He doesn't mean it, Damien thought. He's tired, that's all. But when he looked over, Paul returned his gaze resolutely, the map clutched in his hand, his determination plain. The escort's engine whined as it began laboring up the back of a large broken rise. Well, I can't, Damien answered silently, his stomach churning. Only, the alternative was no more palatable. Life without Paul, the only man he'd ever dared love. The space inside the car suddenly seemed way too small. Aren't you going to say anything? They passed another old sign that Damien almost missed, faded and barely visible through the tangle of anemic trees that huddled around it, announcing the inevitability of gate down in 3 kilometers. You dumped this on me out of the blue, then expect an immediate response. No, Paul said, flipping the map into Damien's lap. Not immediate. You've got 3 kilometers left. The map slid onto the floor. I've made up my mind, Damien. I can't abide half a relationship any longer. Either we turn left at the junction together, or we turn back and go our separate ways. Your choice. The escort continued to toil up the hill. They'd crested. Momentarily, Damien was possessed by an irrational impulse to stomp on the brakes, to throw the car into reverse and back up past the start of their conversation, back to a place where everything had been all right. Topping the ridge, they dropped into a shallow valley and came upon Gate Town. Damien's mind numbly registered the outskirts, a scattering of clapboard houses, some dodgy trailers that had sunk cinderblock roots, a lone Quonset hut. Down the highway, he saw more responsible-looking brick structures clustered around an intersection, a lone stop light suspended above the road by thin black wires as fine as the lines in one of Paul's pen and ink drawings, although they were too far to make out the markings on the green highway sign posted at the intersection. Damien knew with heart-sinking certainty it marked the junction. The intersection seemed to be flying towards him. Lifting his foot from the gas, Damien eased the escort off the road. Gravel crunched under the tires. "What are you doing?" Paul sounded alarmed, like maybe he. The junction. The intersection seemed to be flying towards him. Lifting his foot from the gas, Damien eased the escort off the road. Gravel crunched under the tires. "What are you doing?" Paul sounded alarmed, like maybe he thought Damien was going turn around or ask him to climb into the trunk. "Gas," Damien said, pointing at the pump in front of the Quonset hut. "We're out of gas." Somehow his mind had registered the congruence of pump and gas gauge needle hovering just below. And had grasped at the momentary reprieve like a drowning man. What a scrap of flotsam. Paul frowned, eyeing the gauge. Damien pulled up beside the pump, killed the engine, and reached for the door handle. "Yesterday." Damien paused, a leg out the door. "When I went to the wine store, I filled up." Paul looked at Damien. "It should still be half full." "Look at the gauge." Damien felt detached, like someone else was talking. "It says we're out of gas." "Tell me about it." It took Damien a second to realize Paul had just served up a shot. "Don't react," he thought numbly. "It'll only make things worse." He stepped onto the dirt lot, the chill of autumn enveloping him. The gas bar seemed abandoned. For a second he couldn't remember why he was here, of all the places he might have been in the world. He undid the gas cap. No one appeared from the hut. Paul opened his door and climbed out, leaning on the roof. "Well?" He said it like he thought Damien had contrived this delay. "It's not self-serve." The pump, an old mechanical one, had no digital display, no instructions, no card swipe. On its side was a flow indicator, a small half-sphere of glass with an orange ball that would flutter the moment the gasoline started flowing. "You know, that's not what I was asking. I want to know." Inside, he heard Paul climb back into the car. Damien tried the handle. Locked. He leaned forward, cupping one hand against the glass to block the bedeviling reflections. Hard to make out anything, just the shadowy outlines of a cramped front office, a beat-up metal desk, sagging shelves to one side, a yellowing girly calendar tacked to the back wall. Damien was about to turn away when, in the far corner, a movement caught his eye. He squinted, but whatever had shifted was still now. Raising his hand, he rapped sharply on the glass. A figure reared up from the floor, cutting across the smeared field. A view in full sight for a split second, then disappearing through a back-room door. A naked girl. At least Damien was pretty sure it had been a girl. Behind the glass, a second figure rose now, levering itself up. Tentatively, like it had just woken. It swept upwards, dwarfing Damien, practically filling the whole window, stooping as its head brushed the ceiling. Its skin was the same color he'd spotted earlier in the field, an off-pink, except now he could see it was marbled with blue veins, like the ribbons of flesh left between the ribs of an eviscerated carcass. Where there should have been a face was a vacant oval, or at least no distinguishable features, just nubs or indentations where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth. For half a heartbeat, the empty visage regarded Damien impassively. Then the thing turned and wobbled drunkenly into shadows that folded around it in a protective mantle. For another second, Damien blinked at the imp. Damien smelled a whiff of something on Jerry, like the stink of rotting potatoes he'd once found moldering under the sink. "You've got a leak." Damien looked but couldn't see anything. "Leaking? A hewn gas. I'd better have a look." Jerry trotted back to the office, returning a moment later with a flattened cardboard carton. Placing it on the ground at the rear bumper, he lay on it face up, wriggling underneath the car. Damien heard him tinkering with something. Then he made a chaying sound. A moment later he eased himself out and got to his feet. "Big crack in your gas tank," he said, wiping his hands on a pristine rag he pulled from his back pocket. "Leaking like a cocksucker." Damien glanced behind the car. A tiny rivulet now snaked through the dirt. "So what does that mean?" Paul's question startled Damien. He hadn't heard him open his door. "You need to get her fixed, or you won't make it another 10 miles, let alone the next gas station." "How long to fix it?" Paul said. He sounded angry, but Damien knew him well enough to know his anger masked his agitation. "Need to drain the tank, let her dry out overnight, and then weld a patch. You'll be back on the road by 11 tomorrow." Paul's expression tightened. Damien felt relief. Another distraction. Maybe a reprieve he'd almost forgotten about. Paul's ultimatum. Maybe Paul had, too. What's it going to cost? It was the expected question, even, though Damien didn't really give a damn. With parts and labor and a new tank of gas, it'll run you about 75. Less than Damien had guessed. Fine, do it. You'll have to leave the car overnight. Jerry nodded towards the junction. There's a hotel just on this side of the lights. He pointed. It has a bar downstairs. Just don't go in there expecting much action, if you know what I mean. He smiled, exposing a row of perfect teeth, and elbowed Damien lightly in the ribs, startling him. Leastways, not for a couple of young bucks like you. He winked at Paul, who opened his mouth as if to say something, then snapped it shut. That's okay, Damien said quickly. We need a break anyway. That's why we're batching it. He handed the keys to Jerry. Just us, a lake, and some cooperative fish. The lie slipped out before Damien realized they had no poles or tackle boxes or bait in the car. Paul pulled his overnight bag from the back seat and started off down the shoulder of the highway towards the hotel. He was pissed, as pissed as Damien had ever seen him, moving at a good clip, too. Damien nodded at Jerry, then hustled after Paul, finally catching up. As they neared the intersection, Paul? Eyes forward, refusing to look. Fine, Damien thought. Let him pout. At least he wasn't talking nonsense about visiting Damien's parents. He slowed, letting Paul stay a few steps ahead. On the other side of the road, an old man, wearing a white Panama hat, tweed jacket with an ascot in gray, loafers, leaned on a walking stick, waiting patiently for a miniature Scotty while it sniffed critically at the base of a sapling. It was an absurdly small dog, not like the Rottweilers or German Shepherds that Damien remembered from his own town, the sort of dogs that would have ripped a Scotty like that to pieces given half a chance. The man lifted his chin to stare, and Damien looked away, hurrying to catch up with Paul. In silence, they passed a row of businesses: Ace Hardware, the high-style hair salon, a dry cleaners, the Apollo 8 diner. Coming to the last building before the intersection, a vertical Art Deco sign bolted to its side. The words Town Hotel were visible on the bottom part, but someone had painted over the top bit. Damien could guess what lay underneath. They entered a narrow lobby. To the right, through a set of open glass doors, was the bar, dark wood paneling, round tables, and curved back chairs. The walls hung with posters of barely clad cheerleaders advertising different brands of beer that Damien found indistinguishable in taste. A few late afternoon patrons gave them no more than a bored glance. On the lobby desk there was a bell. Damien banged it until a gray "I'm tired, por. Can't we discuss going to my parents tomorrow when we pick up the car?" Moving over to the window, Paul lifted a green chintz curtain with his finger, his head turning slowly, tracking someone walking along the sidewalk outside. Maybe the old guy with the Scotty. Your parents? That's not what I meant. Paul let the curtain drop. I was talking about that thing. There was no thing. I was right there. You were 30 feet away. It was just Jerry and some girl. Girl? Paul took a step towards Damien. What girl? The one who ran by first. It wasn't a girl. There's no need to raise your voice. Damien glanced at the walls. No one's listening, if that's what you're worried about. We're the only people in this dump. Look, I'm as pissed as you that we're stuck here. Damien spoke, in a whisper. Really? Paul sniffed. You sure don't seem to be. We've just got to make the best of it. Something's wrong, and you don't care. This is a small town. Damien was getting annoyed. Everything's wrong here. It was Jerry. What are you talking about? There was no girl. Just Jerry. Then that thing. Jerry? You're nuts. It had been a girl and Jerry afterwards. Except Jerry wasn't very tall, shorter than Damien, and kind of skinny, while the second figure had been big. Really big. Only it made no sense. Two men? Not here. You saw him, Paul. Talk to him. He wasn't rattled or upset. He was whistling. Not the way he'd act if he'd just been caught with another guy. He was gay. Hell, he was even flirting with you. I saw him wink. Damien shook his head. Christ, Paul, you can't be gay in a place like this. You were. I meant you can't be openly gay here. Or anywhere, apparently. Damien's cheeks heated. I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Why doesn't that surprise me? I'm going to the diner to get something to eat, Damien said, opening the door. If you want, you can join me. Wait. Paul's anger melted. He looked nervous, scared maybe. I was only. But Damien pulled the door shut. For a second he stood in the hall, hand still on the knob, squeezing it so hard it hurt his fingers. It's not my fault, Damien thought. I refused to feel guilty. Letting go, he thumped downstairs and stepped out of the hotel onto the street. On the north side of the intersection, a couple, walking hand in hand, swung right and disappeared into a narrow laneway. Damien had only caught a glimpse of them from the back. One, from the size and shape, could have been Jerry. The other had to duck under a NO parking sign 10 feet off the ground. Damien's heart pounded. He took a few halting steps toward the lane, then stopped. Just my imagination. Paul's got me so worked up, shouldn't come as a surprise.